This episode of GenreVision is brought to you by our premium subscribers at patreon.com/GenreVision. For $5 a month, our premium subscribers get access to an ever-growing library of exclusive bonus content, including weekly pre-show recordings, peeks behind the scenes, and a big currently consuming session every month. Sign up at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we are continuing Haunted Media Month with Pulse, or as it's known in Japan, Kairo, from 2001. But just want to say, if you really dig what we're doing here on GenreVision, it would help us out so very much if you rated and reviewed the show on the Apple Podcast Store.
Yeah, we actually did get another review on the Apple Podcast Store from Australia.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah, this is listener LJA316. They gave us a 5-star review. They say, came here for Neil Breen movie reviews, which are awesome, and love your other reviews. Great work, guys. Great work reviewing the podcast. Damn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. It is not just a compliment, it is actually helping out the health of the show.
Yes, these reviews don't just pump up our egos. What they do is they help drive the show upward in the Apple Podcast charts, which is important for visibility and ultimately the growth of the show. So if you could take a moment out of your day and go to the Apple Podcast Store on your PC or your Mac or your iOS device and give us a star rating and a brief review, that would be a huge help, and we promise to read it on the show. Just so long as you don't say anything like totally cancelable. If you drop like certain bombs in your reviews, like not only will we probably not get it because Apple's like, you know, they want to shut that shit down, but like you got to be nice. Be nice. Even if you hate us, you can be nice about it.
Yeah, exactly. So we are going to talk about Pulse, but before we do, we're going to do something that we rarely, if ever, do on this show. And we're going to say up front that this movie and this discussion is going to tackle some pretty difficult subject matter. Honestly, maybe some of the heaviest subject matter we've ever talked about on this show. And if that is not something that you think you might want to hear or to experience, go check out our timestamps on GenreVision.com and in the descriptions for this episode, and skip ahead to the stuff that you do want to hear.
Yes. Drew and I really didn't know the kind of severity of just like how Pulse would touch upon its themes. But like, make no mistake, the movie is about severe depression, and it talks about it in a way that is very blunt, but also uses its supernatural metaphors to really great effect. And if you don't want to hear a movie that's all about really severe depression, you can skip this. It's totally okay. Go to the timestamp section and just skip ahead to currently consuming or the shelf, or you know, come back next week when we talk about all the Evil Dead stuff. That's going to be really fun.
I can't wait. It's going to be one of the most joyous episodes ever. It's certainly of this year.
Yeah.
So Pulse is a movie that Travis and I had seen before. I think I've only seen it once before.
I hadn't seen it. I'd seen the remake though.
Oh, okay. So yes, I had seen this when I had really first started getting into the J-horror boom. This was part of a batch of bootleg VHSs that I ordered that had been ripped from Japanese DVDs. It was this, Ring, Versus, and Battle Royale. That was the other one. It was those four. This was the only one that of those movies that I had never revisited, that I didn't really remember. All I remember was like, yeah, that was creepy. I remember it being creepy, but that was about it. After watching it this time, there is a part of me, and I'm not saying this as a comment on the quality of the movie. I really kind of wish we hadn't watched this, because we had done this haunted media thing, and we were like, well, we want to represent different types of haunted media throughout the month. So it's like, oh, we've got a haunted movie and haunted video games. Oh, let's do a haunted internet movie. Travis had suggested, or at least just put out there on the list, fear.com. And we were kind of like, we'll do the Stay Alive will be kind of our like, oh, goofy, this is considered really, really bad one. And then we were like, oh, let's do another international movie and a haunted internet movie. Pulse, the original Pulse. That sounds good. And upon watching it, it is, I think I can confidently say, the most depressing movie we have ever covered on this show.
Maybe. I mean, it's certainly way, way up there.
Yeah.
So I was expecting something that was a little bit more along the lines of Ring, which is a really well thought out and beautiful movie.
Yeah, go listen to our Ring episode.
Yeah, but it's also the kind of movie that can spawn like a big, silly franchise.
Mm-hmm.
This, however, has no Japanese sequels, and it played at the fucking Cannes Film Festival in 2001. It is a much, much more serious film. Not that it's like super art housey, because it's not, but it's certainly extremely measured. And it was doing things with its visual language that American horror wouldn't catch on to for another 8 years, probably. It is a really big difference. You know, when you look at what Japanese movies like Pulse were doing in 2001 versus what American horror movies were doing. You know, just very, very different things. Like, even though America was trying to make its J-horror remakes, like the only thing that comes close to what Pulse does is Gore Verbinski's Ring remake, you know, with the kind of pacing and the attention to mood and the attention to aesthetics. Like,
but even those things, there is a heightened horror movie energy to that.
Hollywood movies want to make everything big, 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 you know.
Well, even, yeah, I was even thinking about that in regards to, because I was thinking about Ari Aster movies at some point during my screening. And I thought about, it's like, this, like, I don't want to say tonally, but emotionally, that's kind of the closest thing I can compare this to. However, Ari Aster's movies are purposefully heightened because they are still, I think, subjected to those kind of expectations with American horror cinema. Like, we expect some level of heightenedness to key us into, this is a horror movie.
Yeah. Ari Aster's movies are pretty funny, though. Like, he's
sure,
even in Midsummer, which is ridiculously bleak and very mean-spirited, has some like real big laughs in it.
Oh yeah, and so watching Pulse, it was kind of a fascinating study in that, like, oh, this is all of that kind of intense, deep, dark, very, very painful emotion, but with all of the heightenedness stripped away. The subtlety on display in Pulse is very, very calculated. It's interesting. We were talking about it earlier before we started recording. As a horror movie, the scariest kind of outright horror stuff happens very early in the movie. And that's when we actually get introduced to what are actually two concurrent stories going on. One is focusing on a woman, her name is Michi. She's an employee at a plant shop, and she is trying to get this disc from her friend Taguchi, who's been missing for a couple days working on this thing for their job. There's another story that is about it seems like a college student, some kind of student. His name is Kawashima, and he is made aware. He's plugging into the internet for the first time, and this is, you know, all very new to him, and he doesn't know what's going on, and comes across this strange site that asks him if he would like to what's this? So I think it's like, would you like to?
The subtitles on our copy said, "Would you like to meet a ghost?"
Meet a ghost, yeah, and so these are kind of the two kickoffs to these two stories, but really the kind of most outright expected horror stuff that you would not just horror stuff in the genre itself, but also the kind of J horror elements that were very popular during this J horror boom. That was pretty much like the mid to late 90s throughout the early 2000s. Those elements, it almost feels like Pulse wants to get them out of the way early on. And they're effective. Like, I jumped like 2 or 3 times pretty early in the movie with some great scares. But that is not really what the movie's concerned with.
Sure. It's pretty front loaded with scares and also the setup of everything. Like, one of the stories, it's, you know, the young economics student, Kawashima, him getting signed up with the internet disc. You know, it's very AOL, very old school. It's this internet provider named Uranus or Uranus, I guess. And he takes the CD-ROM and he puts it in his computer and he goes through the sign up process, and like Windows even throws him a couple errors and stuff like that. It's all very mundane.
I saw those Win32 errors.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's going on with this DLL file? I don't know. It's Windows. Anyway, he manages to get signed up, and there's this very Videodrome moment where his browsing is taken over by, words on the screen that ask him if he wants to meet a ghost. And so he starts to see what look like live video feeds into other people's apartments, very similar to his kind of setup, where it's just like kind of oppressively mundane and desaturated looks into people's sad computer-centric lives, like looping moments.
And it is always people alone.
Yeah.
They're never, it is, just a single person just sitting in front of their computer, just sitting in their apartment or house. And this is where the movie is going to thematically drive its point, because this movie is about loneliness, and this movie is about, I really think this movie is about suicide. It's using a lot of metaphor and genre elements to talk about ghosts and what a ghost is. And there's a great line later about how ghosts and people are the exact same thing. And what it eventually comes around to is this idea that ghosts have been populating some realm since the beginning of human history. And a character posits the idea, well, after a while, that system is going to get overloaded, that it has a finite capacity. What's going to happen? And we were saying before the show, it's very much the Dawn of the Dead line. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. But where that movie took that line and used it to satirize American consumerism and the decline of American exceptionalism, this movie is more so talking about how the feelings you have from loneliness and depression can make you believe that you truly are alone. And I know we're kind of jumping around plot-wise with this.
But I mean, thematically, this is what the movie is about. This is the big deal thing. Like,
yes,
there's not a whole lot of plot in this movie. There's some setup early on in like the first third of the movie. It's difficult because like this doesn't apply by like the standard act structure that we would see in a Hollywood screenplay.
No.
But once the first third of the movie is done, it's then just a matter of like, well, who's next? And how's it going to get them? And, like what sort of reserved, elongated method is it going to take to get there? Because it's, it's a fairly long movie at 2 hours. You feel that length.
Well, and part of that, I think, is the director, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, has done some things in here that have to be intentional in amplifying these feelings of loneliness. And I would say what a lot of people will call a slow burn. I wouldn't even call Pulse a slow burn. This is a constant, just intentional, purposeful, droning hum of a movie.
It is, but I mean, it's pretty creepy early on. Like,
it is. No, absolutely. I'm not saying that as a negative.
Oh yeah, I know. I get you. But like early on in the movie, Michi, the young woman who helps run this greenhouse, she goes to visit her friend Taguchi, who supposedly has something on a disc for her that's important to her work. What this thing is that Taguchi has for her is totally unimportant. It's a goober. It's it's just a reason for her to go find Taguchi. Mm-hmm. And she goes to his apartment, and we immediately know something is off because of the way the camera is moving and what it's choosing to show us in the apartment. There's an immediate sense of this is off. There is a use of a plastic curtain to separate rooms in his apartment that is intensely scary.
It's because we can see a figure, and it's not a jump scare thing. It is just, I know that is a person behind that curtain sitting over there in silhouette. What is going on? This is so odd and bizarre. And eventually we will learn that this is behavior exhibited by people who have been affected by this ghost site. This reminds me a lot of, I think, the kind of effect or tone that the best kind of creepypastas were trying to elicit from readers.
Yeah.
There is less of a ooh, boo, gonna get you feel, and more just something is wrong with the world, and it is perverted in a really deep way that I'm not exactly sure about yet. And eventually the movie will reveal itself in that regard. But
sure,
this opening sequence with Taguchi, who Michi comes and is here to get this disc and is going through, and he's like, oh yeah, it's right over there. And he is grabbing some, like an extension cord. And just while he's like, oh yeah, it's right over there. Okay.
Yeah. The camera, by the way, does not focus on this. So the reveal of what has happened is incredibly shocking, because after a while he stops talking, and then Michi goes around the corner to find him to see that he's hanged himself in his closet. And the reveal of that is so surreal because they've chosen a really extreme effect to show it. Like they've made a dummy, essentially, a silicone dummy of Taguchi with this horribly stretched out neck. It would be comedic if it were like in a slightly different context, but it's like really disturbing.
It is. This is where I feel this is almost a deliberate echoing of the big J horror stuff, because this moment is in a lot of those J horror movies from this era, where it's like, this is your first big scare. The one that most people will be familiar with is when they find the girl in the closet in Ring. Like, this is that, like, ooh, this is a really creepy, ghoulish death tableau.
Is that scare only in Gore Verbinski's version though?
No, that's in the original. That's in the original Ring.
But it's certainly more extreme in the Verbinski one.
Yeah, of course. But this one, it still has that. And this feels like this moment, but it feels like, and this is overall for the movie, Pulse is subverting so much of what was going on in J horror at the time. And it's delivering on those things, but it is very, very, very purposefully saying, we're doing something else here, and we're going to use the tools that you think you're familiar with to get to what we actually want to do. Mm. There is an understandable read of this movie where somebody will say it's extremely boring and nothing happens. And for the most part, I think that's usually a very lazy criticism. I would understand it with this movie, even though I would still disagree with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is more about mood and, slow camera movements and long takes. Like, I get, if somebody's bored by this movie, I would get that why they would be bored. But I found it to be pretty riveting.
Oh, me too.
Because it's a pretty damn scary movie. And I don't, I don't find horror movies to be all that scary for me anymore. And I'm not saying that as a flex. It's just, I don't think about horror movies like that much anymore. But this got to me. There is a moment where Michi's friend Yabe, who very early in the movie, after hearing about Taguchi's suicide, he goes, I get that way sometimes. It's so easy to hang yourself. And he just says it so, he just kind of rattles it off. It's like, what? But he sees a ghost shortly thereafter. He's in a stairwell, and he sees this woman walking towards him, and she appears initially to be walking very slowly. And then suddenly her gait changes, and she starts dipping. It's almost a dance. And as soon as that happened, I literally gasped. I couldn't control my reaction. I was like, ugh! It was so alarming to me.
The one in that moment for me is he hides behind this couch, and he's looking to see if she's there. And the cut to her being right over the couch with her hands over it. Oh my God. I jumped like a little baby. I was just like, ah! And it's not a big, there's no giant musical sting. There's no, there's no intense, shaky head cam or anything like that. It is just pure image. And on that alone, it's very effective. Talking about some of the filmmaking, I do want to say another element that feels very intentional is that there is not a lot of score in this movie.
No, at least not at first.
No, not at first. And that feels very intentional because this movie is trying to emphasize a feeling of emptiness, because that is part of the emotion that it's trying to get to with these feelings of loneliness. And again, I think that's another element that especially American audiences will feel immediately put off by. Mm. And it's unfortunate because I think it's one of the best things about the movie. Actually, later in the movie, when the score kind of actually becomes more traditional, I was like, this actually isn't working for me, because this movie has taught me, like, no, silence is good. And if you do start to hear score, it's going to be kind of ambient and very just low key, and it will be creepy. But that's all you're going to get. There's no themes or melodies or big orchestrations or anything until one very particular sequence in the end.
Yeah, which actually makes it feel melodramatic in a way that doesn't suit the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Transitioning over to the other plot where we have this young economics student. He experiences this weird phenomenon where he's introduced to quote unquote ghosts. And he goes to the local computer science geeks at his school, and he meets this woman, Haruo, who explains like, okay, yeah, let me see that. What's going on with that? And she never really gets, a proper explanation from him as to what he's seeing or what he's experiencing, but she does eventually begin to experience it herself. And, the movie spends a lot of time with them and sort of, the detective story around what's going on. Mm-hmm. And, it's full of weird stuff. Like, there's this program that was written by another student there that shows a bunch of like animated dots on a screen, but the dots are all, they never come close enough to each other. It's again, touching on these feelings of individuals in isolation who never get close enough to one another. And the movie is constantly talking about this stuff.
Well, the idea of the simulation, just real quick, I want to say is that it is this randomized idea of these dots that float around. The idea is that, they stay apart, but they are constantly pulled towards each other. But if any two of them connect, then I believe one of them, if not both of them, will disappear or die.
Yeah, and the dude who runs the greenhouse in the other plot, he mentions to Michi once, Michi wants to go say something to, I think, Yabe or her other friend. And he's like, isn't it tough that we can't really say, these really big important questions to our friends because we'll risk our friendship and we'll risk losing that. People like in that way, people don't really connect. That's what he tells her. And it's like, Jesus, this movie is on some seriously dark shit.
Well, and we should say that this is all tied into the internet revolution, which, had been happening, but really took off in the late 90s and specifically the early 2000s.
And as always in Japan, they were years ahead of where we were.
Right. Exactly. And this movie is arguing that the internet is going to actually amplify people's feelings of loneliness and insecurities and depression, and also that the internet will lead to some of the darkest material that can come out of the human psyche. Mm-hmm. We said this earlier, and I think I stand by it. I think this is one of the essential "the internet was a mistake" movies.
For sure. It is. It's not like Black Mirror in that it's actually using its metaphors to talk about what it wants to talk about. And it does so very directly in its dialogue, but it's not using the same heavy-handed techniques that Black Mirror would use to tell the same story. Yes, there is a similar kind of oppressive darkness to it, but it's way more elegant in a story like Pulse.
Well, it's less about the tech. Like, to get off on a brief tangent with Black Mirror is very much about the tech is bad.
Sure.
It will amplify humans' badness, but the tech as conceived is bad. That is not really what Pulse is getting at. Like, it is saying that the internet is going to be this thing that is going to basically remind people like the illusion of connectivity, because that is what another thing that the movie is talking about is the illusion of connectivity between people, that you never really deeply connect with somebody. And this is all feeding into what ends up being the big kind of lore motivation of it, is that the idea that if the realm of ghosts has a finite number, eventually the ghosts have to stop that realm from getting overpopulated.
Right. This is what they theorize, by the way. It's never exactly confirmed, but this is what the characters are theorizing.
This is Idris Elba saying, like, maybe it's a weapon in Prometheus. Like,
sure.
It's that. It's a weapon. So this is what the ghosts are doing. The idea is that the ghosts are going to basically make people so consumed by their own sense of loneliness that they will cease to exist functionally. That they will, because at first you think it's like, oh, ghosts are just making people kill themselves, because we see a number of suicides throughout the movie. One, which just from a filmmaking standpoint is incredible, in which a woman falls off of the top of this structure.
That was another gasp moment for me.
Oh my God.
I gasped so hard. It was
so
horrifying.
horrific. It is so horrific. It made me think of like, this is probably one of those like clips that got out on the internet that people were saying was real at some point, that, you know,
sure,
because it is that good.
Well, and the fact that the movie goes a really, really long time without acknowledging that moment, and then later on in the movie cutting to the permanent stain on the concrete ground where that happened, and it's not the big bloody gory stain. This isn't a gory movie.
No,
the stain is another metaphor. You know, everybody who gets
consumed,
I don't know, victimized by the ghost, consumed, leaves a sort of moldy, mildewy stain where they go. And, you know, you see this stain, and sometimes the stain is like, you know, implying the presence of a ghost, like this, you know, the ghosts can leave the stain where they are. And
oh God, I just remembered the Taguchi moment where they see, where he sees
Yabe goes to Taguchi's apartment and sees Taguchi standing in the corner, and then we cut away again to see only the stain.
No, it's not even a cut; it's a pan. Like they pan. You see Taguchi, and then he comes back around the corner. He's like, Taguchi, what happened? And he turns the light on, and then all of a sudden, Taguchi's gone, and where he was, there's just this black stain on the wall. Fuck off! Like,
there's such impact in the filmmaking here, and the fact that it's so reserved most of the time serves to just amplify those impacts. Like, I really got to say, like, this is a super well made movie, and I would recommend it solely on the technical level.
Yeah,
but you know, emotionally, save this one for when you're feeling real good.
Well, and that's the thing, is that, and I'm going to get a little personal here. I'm not going to get too, you know, off track on this, but this is a movie that really touched on feelings that I myself have experienced. And I think that is part of what the movie is talking about, is that everybody, or at least the majority of people, have these kinds of feelings about, I am alone, I will never be loved, I will always be alone. And then what is the purpose of living?
Sure.
This is not just a movie about suicide. It's a movie about suicidal ideation, which is something I have experienced in my life. And I think, again, that the movie is saying a lot of people experience this.
Yeah, no, they're talking about it as a commonality, but they're also talking about it as a meme, like a viral thing. And
yes,
that was oddly prescient, because, you know, some days you look at Twitter and you're like, oh, this is everybody doing their performative depression thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as a person who, yes, also myself, I have, you know, experienced severe depression in my life, depression severe enough that I was medicated for it and went to therapy. And you know, luckily am doing better, but I still deal with it to this day. You know, I've accepted that this is something that has been with me since I was very young and will continue to contend with in my life. And Pulse was not a fun reminder of that. But it is a very good movie. There is a kind of person, however, that feels that doesn't quite get this, and that person is represented by Kawashima. Mm-hmm. Kawashima is the kind of person who does not think about his own mortality.
No, he outright
seems to
rejects
be very
it.
sort of carefree. Yeah.
Well, there's a moment where they're talking about ghosts, and he's like, I don't believe in ghosts. I wouldn't believe in ghosts if I was face to face with one, which eventually happens in the movie. And when he comes face to face with this ghost, he outright rejects it. He says, like, no, I don't acknowledge death. And earlier in the movie, he's talking about, oh, you know, like in 10 years or so, there's going to be science that is going to be able to, you know, make us live forever. And he's like, yeah, we'll be immortal. Like, and that is how he feels.
He's kind of like an optimistic transhumanist. He's talking about, you know, the optimistic view of tech and like where it's going to take people. Mm-hmm. And the movie's
like, no, bro.
Yeah. The movie wants to shut all that shit down. But like, in addition to being a super bummer, it's also doing some artistic things that I'm not exactly sure how to parse yet. Like the symbolism, obviously the symbolism of the color red is very, very important, but it also balances out with a lot of green. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of shots in the movie where they're emphasizing the green versus the red, the green of the natural world and the greenhouse, the anti-tech, and then the red representing the technological evils. There are scenes like I think on Harue's like big desk full of like Neil Breen computers, there are two reflectors. There's a green reflector and a red reflector. And then later in the sort of apocalyptic section of the film, there is a scene where Michi and Kawashima are sitting on like a concrete embankment, and there's like a collapsed red machine. It might be a soda machine or something like that. And then behind them is all the green. So if you're red-green colorblind, you're totally fucked on the symbolism for this. But I still don't know exactly what it represents.
Well, I think you're onto something about green representing life and red representing death. And that whenever a person has been, for lack of a better term, ghosted, they will seal up the area where that ghost is with this red duct tape, and it becomes this symbol of like, oh, that's a ghost house. And it immediately made me think of Wes Craven's comment about why he chose red and green colors for Freddy Krueger's sweater. Mm. And he talked about those being contrasting colors. And he said putting those two colors together actually is very abrasive to the eye.
Yeah, it makes for a very fucking ugly sweater.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ugly sweater, but also I think it certainly creates this vibe. I mean, again, I think the filmmaking and these kind of things are very intentional and very well executed in the movie. But again, I can see a read of this where it's like, this all just looks really bland and like nothing dynamic is happening, because this is so antithetical to a lot of even what has happened in modern horror, even art house horror, I feel.
Sure. You feel like it's leading to something that is not what happens in this movie. Like
it leads to something.
The slow descent into apocalypse in this movie is accomplished in such a strange manner. Like the first time you really get a sense that like, oh, we're on our way to the apocalypse is there's a scene where Kawashima goes to an arcade or like a pachinko parlor, and he's sitting at one of the machines when he realizes he's the only one there. And then he sees a ghost, and he runs away and goes back home. On the way, he does see Harue, I think, out in the street, and she's smashing all of her potted plants. More symbolism.
Yep. She's been consumed, because at some point characters just become consumed by whatever the ghostly intention is, and that is obviously
losing the will to live, basically.
Exactly. And there are so many moments. There's a moment where I think it's Kawashima. He's in a library, and there's a ghost. It's like, oh yeah, there's a ghost boy over there.
Yeah, in broad daylight, really nice.
Yeah, in broad daylight, and it's creepy. But the thing that actually creeped me out about that scene is there are two women in the background, and they are just sitting with their backs to the cameras. And I'm like, this is more, again, it's emphasizing this. People are around us and we are never connecting with them. We are surrounded by other humans and could make meaningful, deep connections, but we isolate ourselves. And in that regard, those women in the background, they have black hair and they're all dressed in black. For all intents and purposes, from the language that this movie is using, they might as well be ghosts.
Sure. The isolation is sort of an interesting theme here, but we're really only able to see it through the cultural lens of American culture.
Sure.
And while I feel like a lot of the themes here are fairly universal, there is a phenomenon in Japan that you've probably heard of called hikikomori, where it's people who stay inside and
Yes.
don't go out, like modern day hermits, basically.
Yeah.
Acute social withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
This could be commenting on that. The hikikomori phenomenon was sort of being, recognized around the time. Here in the Western world, we have what's called NEET.
Yes.
NEET, and it's usually men who are not in education, employment, or training. That's what NEET stands for, NEET. This is recognized in some Asian countries as well, but this is basically a worldwide phenomenon of mostly men who are not seeking to increase their standing in life in any way. They don't want to be employed. They don't want to get trained in anything. They just want to stay home all the time and do as little as possible. And I think Pulse is commenting on that in some way, but it also is talking, very specifically about relationships and how we value them. And like what a strong friendship or a romance could be. There's this long sequence of the movie after Haruo loses the will to live and Kawashimo's like going to her apartment and trying to do this like rescue her thing. He's like, we can live together and things will be okay and we'll support each other and all this kind of stuff. But it's just, it's not going to work out.
The movie doesn't believe in that. And that it is kind of, I think one of the most difficult things about watching this was that accepting, I don't want to say personally accepting, but accepting from an artistic evaluation of that. This is what the movie is saying. Like, this is its belief structure.
Well, there isn't an oddly, it's of course a sad note, but a bittersweet note in the end of the movie where it's revealed that Michi has found her way to a ship of survivors who are sailing across the Pacific to Latin America because there are still signals coming from Latin America. Mm-hmm. And, this is actually the first thing we see in the movie is Michi on a boat. We don't quite know it's her yet, but she's narrating the story. And at the end, it's revealed that she goes back to her cabin and Kawashima is there and he's become a stain. But he still accompanies her. He's still there with her. He's just been consumed. But they're in it together. And that's where the movie ends.
Which is so difficult to parse. Like it's really hard to it's rough.
But it hints at a truth. It doesn't just hint at it. It's very directly about a truth about relationships and that we're here to support one another through this really difficult thing that we all do called life.
But it could consume us.
Yeah, it can absolutely consume us. And it puts emotional labor on both people in a relationship to support one another. And sometimes it literally means dragging the people you love through their emotional muck, to help them be better on the other side. Like we're going to talk about the Evil Dead remake a little bit next month, but like that movie's pretty much about the same thing, but it just accomplishes it in a very different way, where it talks about sacrificing yourself to save somebody that you love, or trying to save them from themselves very specifically. So, this is, like we said, not an easy watch. And I don't know when would be a good time to watch this movie.
Not in 2020. I'm telling you right.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now.
On that shit.
This was a bad move on our parts. I think this movie is great. Like legitimately great. This is another one of those movies that I would put in my personal canon of this is an almost essential movie that I hope I never feel the need to watch again.
Yeah, it's super well directed, very well acted, doesn't dip into silly melodrama ever, and is, in this case, better for it. Sometimes silly melodrama is exactly what a movie needs, so I'm not shitting on that. But this is probably one of the scariest horror movies from Japan of this time that I've ever seen. I mean, it really did scare me. I'm sitting alone in my apartment watching this thing in the dark and, seeing that ghost come out.
Sure. I mean, well, that again, just echoes the thematics of the movie. And, I'm to get a little personal. It's like, yeah, I'm living in a place with somebody else, but when I do these things or when I'm working, it's like, yeah, I'm just sitting here in front of my computer screen, totally alone for the majority of my day when I'm, doing work or doing this podcast. And it is seeing those images of people doing that exact same thing as this mission statement from the ghosts. Like why should you deserve life when you're acting no better than us? And it's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
This is the kind of horror movie that I think is so exceptionally rare and should be, because while it does have horror moments and, that you'll expect and are done successfully, this is way more like, this is a movie that is 100% about constant mood. And we've talked about on the show how a lot of American audiences and really value consistency in tone and mood and everything. That's here in Kairo, in Pulse, but it is like the roughest version of that, to the point where I totally understand this being either abrasive because of the techniques that it's using to tell its story being so antithetical to what people expect from when you say, oh, it's a scary ghosts in the computer, ghosts in the machine type movie. But also because the subject matter is there's a moment in this movie where there's this, we see what I believe is the origin of this essentially virus, this mimetic virus, which is a suicide video on the internet. And we're teased with that earlier because there's this person sitting in a dark room with, all of this stuff scribbled on the wall.
"Help me" written on the wall behind
Yep.
him.
And that is throughout the movie, whenever somebody becomes consumed by this force, you'll hear them whispering, sometimes with a ghostly, effect over it, just "Taskate, taskate," which is "help me, save me." And eventually it's revealed that this is that the video that does this, because the person that's sitting in there, they have a black bag over the head. They're walking towards the camera. It's very spooky. God,
it's fucking freaky to watch, dude.
Oh, I just remembered something else from the movie. I'll talk about it in a second.
It is that kind of movie, but like this touches on the sort of videos that would spread in the dark corners of the internet,
especially in the era. I mean,
before the current age of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, I think, on also an interesting historical document for this era of the internet, which was very formative to people like you and I, in our generation. And so eventually it's revealed that this video is just going to be somebody walking up to the camera, putting a gun underneath their chin and pulling the trigger. And like, I've seen a video like that on the internet when I was younger.
Yeah. And what I like about this movie is it manages to keep the impact and the weight of those things without being a gory film.
No, it's there is little blood in this.
There is one scene later where a character repeats the same action, but there's no gore to it, and you're like, what?
It was fine. I'm fine with it because that moment is so horrific and depressing. But
there was a moment where my brain went, "Jim, how could you have committed suicide, Jim?"
Right. Well, that has more blood in it than this, but
a lot, yeah.
But there's the moment that I remember that just freaked me out, that I realized just right now, is I believe it's Haruhi, when she realizes the ghost, the presence, is in her apartment and she's watching herself on the computer screen.
Oh, dude, yeah, super fucking freaky.
And she eventually turns around and is walking towards this thing, which is a totally invisible thing, but we keep cutting back to the computer screen, which is this unknown ghostly POV. And she's reaching out to this thing to say, it's like, "I'm not alone." It's fuck. Oh,
the recursive stuff, like, what is his name? Taguchi's apartment. Like they get the disc from him, and on the disc is this picture of his computers, like his computer desk, but they can see the same picture on the screen of the computer. And like, it's this recursive reflection that just keeps going on and on and on.
A spiral. It's a tunnel.
It's so disturbing.
It's a spiral of depression, of loneliness. And that's the thing, is like, this movie is great. Talking about the ending a little bit, where it is like, this is a ghost apocalypse movie. Like, this is, but as we continue throughout the movie, we see less and less people out in these large public areas. And it's like, oh yeah, they're all being taken. We see these news reports that's just a litany of, this person is missing. There's children who are age 8 and 5 and older people that are all missing. And eventually it's like, yeah, this is the end of the world. And the ending stuff where it is, the characters eventually, is it Kawashima and Michi, or is it Kawashima and Haruhi who are there in the end?
Michi and Kawashima are the two people that meet up in the end and are like,
that's where
run away together.
Yeah, the stories converge, and throughout that ending, we start going, it's like, okay, we're driving through cities. There's nobody around. There's smoldering cars. There is a big, like, B-2 bomber crash that is that is the one moment. It's like, I get what this is trying to do, and that is when there's like this much more traditional score going on. And it's like, yeah, this is trying to really emphasize the scale of this, but it feels so in contention with the entire vibe of the rest of the movie.
Yes, and it shows its ass a bit technically because it's very CGI heavy. Like there's a bunch of like fake cars and fake smoke that they're driving around, and like the plane is obviously CGI,
which is fine like for the ghost stuff.
Sure. And then, like they get in a speedboat, for instance, to escape Japan. There's a scene where Michi goes into like a nearby building to get a key, and the entire environment of the interior of the building is CG because there's like all this ash falling and all these like ashy skeletons around. And I'm like, this looks like garbage. This looks like a Silent Hill environment.
Yeah, it's not great. Also, in perfectly Japanese fashion, the final moments of this movie end with like a Japanese Lisa Loeb song. Like
the pop song felt very incongruous. Yeah,
it's this way. It's not even as poppy. It's like this kind of, I don't know, almost alt rock Japanese like girlcore stuff.
Female vocals. Yeah,
and it is just like, this is so it's almost like I needed this after this movie. Like, this is a laugh I didn't know I needed.
But they, that's the kind of vibe that they wanted to leave you on, of like, this is the mood. This is the friendship between Michi and Kawashima now.
Well, and the thematic weight of the final image is this bird's eye view of this ship that they're all escaping on. It's the single lone ship in the middle of a vast empty ocean, and the frame actually shrinks. So it just, like sunken place style. And it's just like, oh yeah, it is just, again, we are being sucked up by this black void of emptiness, of loneliness, of nothingness. Pulse is great, but it is one of those movies that I'm just like, don't watch it. Like, and I
don't watch it now. Hold off until like we're all in a much better place.
In like 5 years, like watch it. Like,
well, I mean, just I'm not even going to put a number on it, but just like whenever you're feeling confident enough to watch a movie that is directly about severe depression, feelings of isolation with mental illness, suicidal ideation, the act of suicide. Like, again, these are all things that the movie touches on. They're not easy things, but they're all things that I think that we connect with on some level. Like the movie wants to say like, these things aren't unthinkable. These things are part of the fabric of life, unfortunately. And they're tough to deal with. They're almost sometimes impossible to think about. So
and I think the movie's saying ignoring those feelings, it's what is going to lead to a mass expulsion of them.
Yeah.
That it's like, and that the internet, talking about this to close things up in regards to our haunted media theme, the idea that the internet is only going to amplify these things, that it is not going to be a tool, that is, again, the illusion of connectivity, that it is, this tool is actually only going to enhance these feelings and make you think that you're actually connecting and that you're actually, feeling camaraderie or whatever it may be, when in actuality it is only disconnecting you more. It is a lie. It is a lie that is being told to you.
Yeah, it makes you question like, what is a quality connection between two people?
Yes.
And I can tell you right now, like one of my quality connections is with my co-host Drew Deitch. And I wouldn't be doing this without him. I love you too, man. I don't want to talk about this movie anymore, as good as it is.
Nope.
I would like to talk about some shelf picks. And the shelf is something that we do here on GenreVision that is a collaborative thing. It is a collaboration between us and you, dear listener. And the way that you collaborate with us on the shelf is you go to GenreVision.com and you look for the post for this episode on the main page, and you go to the comment section and you tell us what you would pull off the shelf to act as a recommendation pairing or a substitution for the week's movie. For Pulse, I'm going to do something a little bit unconventional. My mom has a rating system for movies. She calls them scoops. There's a 1 scoop movie. Sometimes there's a 2 scoop movie. It's how many scoops of ice cream you'll need after the movie to feel better. A 2 scoop movie for her is like a really severe thing. But my mom is so disconnected from movies like this that she probably can't even conceive of a movie this depressing. So this is like off her scoop rating charts, but my shelf pick, it's just ice cream, baby. Ice cream is one of the top sensory delights that we have been given in this world. I don't give a fuck if it's real. I don't give a fuck. It could be like the Cypher situation.
I was
in
just
the
going to
Matrix,
say, this is the Cypher steak scene.
right? Exactly. I just rewatched The Matrix the other week, by the way, which is still a fucking awesome movie, and I love that. It's probably one of my top 10. But it's ice cream is just so good. The only trouble is, like, you got to look for the good shit. Like, there is bad ice cream, but like ice cream in general, just the idea of it, delightful. We've talked about our favorite ice creams in our pre-shows, which are exclusive to our Patreon listeners. If you want to access those, go to patreon.com/GenreVision. It's $5 a month. They're very good. Anyway, pistachio ice creams. You and I think, both like pistachio ice creams. So I would recommend Ben & Jerry's Pistachio.
Love it.
It is an excellent ice cream. And if you're looking to feel a little bit better, like, grab somebody you love, have some ice cream with them. And if you can't have some ice cream with them, at least talk about how much you love ice cream with them. That is substantial conversation. That is love. That is love.
It is. Absolutely. Could not agree more. Well, I remembered my actual shelf pick while we were talking about this, because I mentioned the creepypasta thing, and I was going to recommend the show Channel Zero, which I think actually in certain instances might be the closest American production I can think of that gets to this particular vibe at times.
Agreed. Particularly season 2.
Yeah, season 2 is my favorite. The No End House is one of my favorite pieces of horror media in the last decade.
It's awesome.
But I do want to stick with the unconventionality of this week's Shelfish, because this is a very unconventional. But we were talking to one of our loyal listeners, Max Garcia, on Twitter, who's saying, you guys don't normally do, like, when I think I said this is the most depressing movie, it's like, what else would there be? You guys don't really cover these kinds of movies. And it's true. It's not something that we're actively seeking out or that we cover in detail a lot. But talking about these kinds of really, really affecting feelings, my shelf pick, honestly, for this week is therapy. And I'm not trying to be glib or comedic about that. I really strongly believe in mental health therapy for people. And I know that this is part of the problem with talking about these things, is that there is an undeniable social stigma and shame attached to people feeling these feelings of intense loneliness to a point where, like, nobody else can possibly feel this extreme as I do.
Sure. And therapy is often, there's a racial stigma to therapy as well. Like, therapy is often regarded as a thing that white people do. Mm-hmm. And in my own experience as a white person who has gone to therapy, I would encourage it for anybody. And the great thing about it now is that there is a way that you can access therapists, diverse therapists, therapists who will understand, your life experiences better than just going to find the local white person that offers therapy where you are. Like, there are some online services that offer that. And, I understand that we live, if you live in the United States, you live in a horrible, horrible system that may not offer you access to affordable therapy. And that is awful. And I extend my deepest sympathies to people. Like, I've been in therapy before. I'll probably end up in therapy again. Shit, maybe next year. It seems like
that's like the way you frame it. It's like, oh, I'm going to end up in this. It's like, I really wish that we could live in a society that was open and understanding about that, and that everybody could have access to that kind of mental care, because I think mental care is just as important as physical care.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if that is an option that's available to you, I strongly recommend it. At the very least, if you do suffer from suicidal ideation or feelings, know that the National Suicide Hotline is there. The number is 1-800-273-8255. If you have these feelings and you really feel that there is nobody that you can reach out to, at the very least, I urge you to do that. As somebody who has experienced those kinds of thoughts before, and know that I am not alone out there. And that is the most important thing to know. You are not alone. There is somebody out there who can help. It may seem trivial at first, but it really is something that I urge you to do, because on a basic human level, I love you and I want you to take care of yourself. And I, we said this was going to get heavy, and there have been moments in this episode where I'm trying to keep my composure. But I really do. I hope, especially in 2020, y'all, I hope the best for you, and I hope that you are able to seek the care and assistance that you feel you need, whatever that may be.
Yes, and seek meaningful connection with your friends.
Yes, and I want to say that we'll talk about this when we get to comments, and certainly we're about to go to the listener shelf. That has certainly been a refuge for me and Travis, throughout the entire run of the show, and certainly in 2020, is our amazing, wonderful, loyal listeners who continue to be just, we say this almost every week, but it really bears repeating, the greatest comments section in the entirety of the internet.
Yes, you guys are the GOAT. Thank you. Being able to know that you're responding to our shelf picks is very affirming. It feels good. I'm glad you all are in on this.
So we are going to head over to the listeners' shelf picks for last week's episode on Stay Alive. Eric Fuchs actually went with a video game. He said Pokemon Red and Blue, because those early Pokemon games are full of glitches and holes the programmers left open. So there's actually some weird, creepy, almost haunted stuff that you can do in those games that's pretty fun. I actually have those kind of memories with those games. So good pick, Eric Fuchs. Mr. Milksteak had quite a few shelf picks for Stay Alive. He also mentioned Brain Scan, which was my shelf pick. And then he also went with The Thing on PlayStation 2, which I played, which I don't remember being too bad.
I played most of it, and I actually I don't remember liking it all that much. Sorry.
I don't think I played through the whole game, but I remembered enjoying it. And then he also went with Nightmares, which is a horror anthology from 1983, which has a segment in it called The Battle of Bishop, which features Emilio Estevez beating the 13th level of his favorite arcade game, which of course gets wonderfully weird and supernatural. That's a fun little deep cut anthology movie. And he also recommended the 2020 movie Sputnik, which is a Russian-made sci-fi creature feature, which I think you watched, Travis, and you said was pretty good.
Yeah, I did see that, and it's pretty good.
Loyal listener Hob went with Tron, not just because I happened to see Tron again the other day, but because the video game aspect of it has pretty horrifying implications. It is, he says,
those costumes are pretty scary.
It is if you die in the game, you die in real life for Jeff Bridges, as far as that movie's concerned. And loyal listener JT went with Cloak and Dagger from 1984. The video game in this one is more MacGuffin than haunted media, but it directly leads its protagonist, child Henry Thomas, into a life and death adventure. And I think that's the movie where, it must be Henry Thomas, is chased by a giant D20. I think that's Cloak and Dagger.
Okay, all right.
I think he has a dream sequence or something. I may be wrong. I don't know. I've never seen Cloak and Dagger.
Oh no, polyhedral dice.
Yes, but I know there's a movie out there where, and I'm betting on Cloak and Dagger, where a kid is running down, I think it's a neighborhood street, and there's a giant D20 trying to crush him, which Travis and I just started playing D&D for the first time in the last couple months, so we're very, we're riding that high.
But you more than me, but
okay. Yeah. Play it down, buddy. Be the cool one. But no, as always, thank you so much for the listener shelf picks. If you want to submit your own shelf picks, we will feature them on next week's episode. Let's do some currently consuming. Nom, 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 nom. Travis, what's been on your plate?
Let's see. World of Tomorrow, episode 3.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you and I both like Don Hertzfeldt.
We did a whole episode on it.
Yeah, very early on. I think it was probably the second episode you and I ever did together. Very rough episode.
Yeah, those days are rough, but it was a very foundational thing for like Travis and I to find a very particular niche of Don Hertzfeldt. Like, no, this is like something that really, really resonates with us.
He's one of my favorite animators, and certainly one of your favorite animators as well. But, he's had this series now that's come out every couple of years called World of Tomorrow, and he's on the 3rd episode of that series. This is the longest episode of the 3 so far, and he does plan on creating more, which is wonderful. But these are stories about the far future, and they're very funny. They're very bittersweet and often sad. The 3rd one does connect to the first 2. It is about a character who is introduced in the first World of Tomorrow short, but it takes his story in a different direction. And it introduces some really cool speculative fiction elements, particularly with regard to time travel. And there is that sort of same cynical heart at the core of World of Tomorrow episode 3. But damn if I didn't like it just as much as the others, and the laughs are just as good. You can rent this on Vimeo. The link will be in the description for this episode. Of course, you can get that on GenreVision.com, but Donna Hertzfeldt has released this for rental on Vimeo for a very fair price, and is working on getting more of these out without, he says without perhaps as long a waiting period if he strikes the right deal with the right streaming service. So fingers crossed. I love these. I like pretty much anything that Don Hertzfeldt has put out. He was nominated for an Oscar for his short Rejected, which is totally formative for both Drew and myself.
Oh yeah.
I think you and I both saw that in high school and have been way on Don Hertzfeldt's wavelength ever since.
Oh yeah.
But he's only gotten better. He's become a better animator, and he's become a better writer. And, his World of Tomorrow stuff is incredibly beautiful, but, has that same sort of Charlie Kaufman-esque, smart boy sadness to it.
Yeah, I will definitely be watching the new World of Tomorrow before the year is out, because it is, I was going to say it's appointment viewing, but I didn't watch it as soon as it came out. But I know I have to mentally prepare a little bit for a new Don Hertzfeldt.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's as impactful in that same way as the first 2 Worlds of Tomorrow.
Okay.
And it's definitely not as big of a bummer as Pulse. So maybe you have that to look forward to, buddy.
Maybe. What was the extended almost movie that he did?
It's Such a Beautiful Day.
It's Such a Beautiful Day. Wow. Probably never going to watch that again.
Yeah. That's about an hour long, and
rough.
Real rough. And, I bought that on Blu-ray not just because it had that on it, but it has a couple of his prior animated shorts that have been scanned and remastered in high definition.
Oh, nice.
Of course, they're awesome. So, yeah. You and I love Don Hertzfeldt, and I think if you made it through Pulse, I think you could make it through World of Tomorrow episode 3.
Yeah, I was not prepared for Pulse by any means, but I made it. Like I survived. I survived 2020 and Pulse.
No small feat, really.
No small feat. Well, real quick on my plate. I saw a new release movie that's hit VOD this week, and this is Love and Monsters, starring Dylan O'Brien. This is actually, I believe it was rewritten, but this was from a script by Brian Duffield, who wrote Underwater, came out earlier this year. And Love and Monsters, I hate this, and we'll link to my review in the show notes on GenreVision.com. I hate saying this, but it's just one of those movies like, yeah, it was fine. Like, it's not bad. It's not great. People seem to be liking it a little bit more than I did, but I also think it's a very easy, digestible movie, and people are certainly looking for that as they're starved for content in 2020, or they believe they're starved for content in 2020. And this is, it's very clearly kind of riffing on the same mood as stuff like Zombieland. I think it's a little bit too much of a blender movie where there's so many influences. And we've said on the show, like, being derivative is not inherently a bad thing, but you have to use that inspiration to carve out your own identity. And I don't really think Love and Monsters ever does that. It's never more than the sum of its parts. But the monster stuff is pretty fun and pretty cool. That's what put it over the edge for me as far as being positive on it. it's the whole idea is that it's another apocalypse thing, and the idea is that a asteroid was going to crash into Earth, so we shot a bunch of missiles at it and stopped it. But the fallout from the missiles irradiated pretty much all of the animals on the surface and turned them into giant monsters. So there's giant termites and giant like centipedes and frogs and all this kind of stuff. The creature designs are very fun. They're way more like fun than you expect from a lot of monster design movies of the modern era. They're very clearly having a ball with that stuff. And those sequences, whenever it is Dylan O'Brien versus a monster, really fun, really the most engaging. But I think the plot is kind of pointless. It's very scattershot. It never picks a lane and sticks to it. It's another one of those movies where I'm like, this feels like it was designed to be a TV show first and then got turned into a movie.
The sensation that I got when I watched the trailer was like, this is trying too hard to make me happy. It was like really going out of its way in several very obvious and silly ways to be like, see, we're appealing. Aren't we appealing? Let me tell you, buddy, we're so appealing.
It's got that particular like YA twee comedy vibe to it at times. Again, this is at times because the movie shifts around all over the place with this stuff.
Yeah. The romance I could tell just from the trailer like holds no water for me.
No, that is by far one of the weakest elements of the movie.
Yeah, but you said this in your review, but I could tell from the trailer it was like, this might have some good monsters in it. So I'm happy to hear at least that the monsters are pretty decent.
It does. I as fans of creature features, I give it a thumbs up in that regard, and that's the thing that put it over for me. It was like, no, I gotta give credit where credit is due. Good, really fun monster sequences, a great variety to the monsters. In that regard, I can recommend it. If I believe in supporting these kinds of things on VOD, so if you can, and that sounds interesting to you at all, I would recommend renting it. I would say if this had shown up, if this was like the big Netflix release of a weekend, I guarantee you it would be the number one thing. People would actually be like, oh, this is so great. It's so fun. And I folded all my laundry to it. So
You're such a shithead.
Yeah, so
here, this is the man who refuses to watch Palm Springs because he already has it in his mind that it is a worthless laundry folder movie when it's actually pretty good. So I say, prithee, Drew, take that and shove it up your ass.
Well, let's close things out with our
comment of the week.
And this one's going to loyal listener Eric Fuchs, who was actually responding to a comment from listener DKTHG, who was asking us if we would do a month of classic mainstream erotic movies, and had some examples like 9.5 Weeks and Last Tango in Paris. I don't know if that's really our bag. I must admit to some ignorance when it comes to that particular subgenre, though it is a subgenre, particularly erotic thrillers, I should say. Not just erotic movies. I like erotic thrillers. But Eric Fuchs responded with sending all my vibes to make them review Showgirls. And you know what? Travis and I have never seen Showgirls.
'Tis true. But you know what we really like? Paul Verhoeven movies.
It's a Paul Verhoeven movie and Kyle MacLachlan's in it. It cannot be all bad. I have to believe that.
Yeah, that's what we're operating on right now. And let me tell you, I don't think there's an erotic thrillers month in our future, but Showgirls, that could show up.
The eyebrows were raised when we both read that comment, like, So we're going to file that one away. Thank you. Thank you both to DKTHG for kicking that off and for Eric Fuchs responding with that. But yeah, we're actually going to close out Haunted Media Month next week. We're talking about the entire Evil Dead franchise. This is not something that we could just limit to one movie in this franchise. So we're doing it all. It's going to be a big blowout Halloween episode closing out Haunted Media Month. So we hope you'll join us for our I'm just going to kind of spoil you, our absolute exaltations about the Evil Dead franchise.
It's a celebration, baby. Show up. Be there with us.
That's right. So we hope you'll be there to celebrate with us next week. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision. We love you.
Take care of yourself.
Show up next week. It's good. Yeah, take care of that ass. Wash those hands. Hop in the shower and,
be well.
Yeah, drop us a line in the emails. Our email is open. GenreVisionPod@gmail.com.
Talk to y'all later.